Humans have this uncanny ability to not think very hard about the deep recesses of the past and what that past might have entailed and how that past might have had an effect on the present. And this is always best illustrated by numerous conversations I've had with people in the past, above all online, but also in real life, and specifically with people on the left, or not exclusively, regarding notions of evolution and the impact it's had on us as human beings, as human apes, as I like to say. Because people have this tendency, this overweening tendency, to talk about human beings strictly in the present, in the moment of their circumstances, as if everything occurring right now were only shaped by what's happening right now, shaped by the morning tea that they drank, or the omelets they ate, or whatever. And yes, these things have an impact. There's no question about that. But when you get to deeper questions about the nature of society and how human beings interact, and above all, male-female relations, they tend to draw blanks. It's what I call the endless vicious circle of socialization. They'll often talk about how situations arise because of the way people are socialized. This is most often applied to gender roles, but not exclusively. And they never think about the deep biological question of what informs human behavior to begin with. They don't think about the nature of culture. You see, there's a necessary, observable hierarchy that starts with biology, then goes to culture, and then goes to things like politics. And isn't it interesting that when people get most excited about things, they typically get most excited about the politics. They get most excited and most interested in the things that, I would argue, have the least impact and are the least meaningful. What I'm claiming is that politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from biology. And here's the trick that you can use, and for some reason people can't wrap their heads around it in my experience, but you ask them, did the dinosaurs have a culture? The answer to this, of course, is pretty obvious. Almost certainly not. They were way too dumb and way too disorganized. I mean, even their structural morphology probably wouldn't have allowed for it. They didn't have a culture. Did they have politics? Well, without culture, you're not going to have politics. What did the dinosaurs have? They had biology. They had reproductive behaviors. They had strategies. They had survival. And even before the dinosaurs, various invertebrates, they didn't have a culture. They didn't have politics, but they did have a biology. And when you do the simple math here, you realize that going far enough back, you have a long, unbroken chain of biology stretching from the beginning of life up until comparatively recently, which is to say, we still have biology, but then we have these other factors that come into play. Culture only emerges when biological systems become sophisticated enough to develop them. And culture then becomes, at least in part, subordinate to that biology, because the culture itself is shaped by the needs of survival and the needs of reproduction, etc., etc. And subsequently, a sufficiently complex culture can then produce a body of politics. But you don't get anywhere without the biology. And I notice that these days especially, and that's partly related to the strange times we're living in terms of political ideology and belief systems, everyone discounts the biology. Because for billions of years, there was biology on Earth, but not a shred of culture. But when we do get culture, and it's difficult to gauge when that happened, the consensus view, which could be wrong, but could be right, somewhere between 70 and 100,000 years ago, boom, we get culture. But before that, what was going on? Culture takes over and it means everything. And politics, at least in the sense of immediacy, the sense of people feeling that's important, means even more than culture. But we need to be cognizant and always aware of the fact that biology precedes both of these things, and both of them are dependent and contingent on the biological circumstances of a given organism, in this case human beings. Again, it's a hierarchy. Why am I talking about this? Well, obviously because the election is afoot, and people are really obsessed with it. But specifically here, I want to address this issue of culture, because whether Biden or Trump is elected, The culture that has been put in place has been developing and evolving for decades. The far left lunacy, to be very specific here, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a slow buildup, or perhaps if you want to interpret it differently, a fast buildup. But it did nonetheless come from a buildup over time. And these things, whether it's fast or slow, do take some time, at least a few decades, sometimes more. What were the conditions that gave rise to it? Well, of course, we could go into it. We could talk about critical race theory and all this other stuff. I'm less concerned about that here, and much more concerned about the fact that society itself became more comfortable because technologies were invented that changed our environment. And when our environment changes, we start acting differently. Human beings always act and react in concert with their environment. If we were all still hunter-gatherers, that's how we would be acting. Wouldn't be an election. There wouldn't be computers or the internet for that matter. You would be locked in that modality. And the reason why you didn't see these types of ideologies in the past is because it was too cost prohibitive given the environment to produce them. I would argue that the invention of birth control is more meaningful and more impactful than anything you'll see as a result of any presidency. It's not all-reaching, but it has had a massive impact on the West. As a consequence, many, many things have changed. We could go through the list, but you're well aware of that list. I don't need to go into it here. And I mention all of this because whilst many people are getting caught up in the fervor of the election and politics in general, we are losing sight of the one tool that might in fact help us in making certain transitions with respect to technology easier and better. Because in the past, what we've always done is we've invented a technology, put it out there, and we just let the chips fall as they may. And sometimes the chips fall in a positive way, and sometimes they fall in a negative way. Usually it's a double-edged sword. Usually it's a mixed bag, as is typical, say, with birth control. But one thing that humans have rarely done is invent something or develop something, put it out there, and before putting it out there, give it long thought and pause to the consequences it might have, or how best it might be integrated or distributed, or you name it. Because we're so lost and caught up in the downstream aspects of this hierarchy in politics and culture that we lose sight of the biology that informs it all and how we might interact with these things. The internet probably is the most recent example. It has fundamentally changed the way we interact with each other, socially or otherwise. There's no denying that. No one would deny that. But when it first came into being, very few people are thinking that. Probably unpredictable for the most part, and it's another reason why, given how unpredictable these things are, at least thinking about the theoreticals as pertain to such models could be useful, because we're standing on the cusp of many new technologies. We're not quite there yet, but we're at the cusp. It will have a massive impact going forward, and how we think about these technologies and how we deal with them will be enormously consequential and supremely important. But if we simply play the game that we're anything other than just animals who happen to have gotten lucky and developed big brains interacting with an environment that reacts to and acts in accordance with incentives and what have you, then we're going to end up in situations like this again and again and again. Everyone's favorite metaphor these days is Chesterton's fence. This idea that if you see a fence someplace, there's probably a good reason why it's there, even though you might not know the reason. Which is to say that our biology has given rise to certain structures in our culture, and consequently our politics, that are there for a reason. And getting rid of this, without giving thought to how things had emerged to begin with, and our very nature as biological beings and animals, is going to lead to disaster, which I think is what we're witnessing now. We are witnessing effectively a carelessness of thought, a disregard for who we are and what we are as animals. And that is and shall continue to be a recipe for disaster going forward. Anyway, thank you for checking out the video. Please hit the like button if you've not yet done so. Hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos. Share the video, much appreciated. And as always, may the gods watch over you. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Be well and take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.